The National Wild Turkey Federation has taken a focused approach to conservation through their America's Big Six of wildlife conservation. 6 regions encompassing 738 million acres were identified to address the most urgent needs and better focus resources. These regions are America's Western Wildlands, America's Great Open Spaces, America's Crossroads, America's Mid-South Rebirth, America's Southern Piney Woods, and America's Colonial Forests. In these regions, the NWTF and its partners are taking conservation delivery to a whole new level.
North central part of Wyoming, we're in the Bighorn Basin. The Bighorn Basin is a relatively dry area. It's surrounded by mountain ranges on all 4 sides. It's got the Absaroka Beartooth Range to the west. It's got the Pryor Mountain Range to the north, and the Bighorn Mountains to the east, and the Owl Creek Range to the south. So basically what happens is it results in an extremely arid environment. There's only about 6 to 10 inches of rainfall a year here in the basin. So the rivers that are associated that run through the basin, primarily the Bighorn River and the Shoshone River, these are the lifeblood of the communities. Communities like Cody, Powell, Byron, Lovell, Grable, Worland. These communities and the ranchers and farmers that live in the basin are extremely reliant upon the water that are found within these rivers. Of course, the National Wild Turkey Federation's interest in the rivers is the riparian areas themselves. These are lands that are associated with rivers and streams and water bodies, but they provide extremely important wildlife habitat. But to the communities and the citizens that live in the basin, it's more than just wildlife habitat. The ranchers and farmers need this water to basically grow crops and feed their cattle and graze. Riparian areas serve much like wetlands in that they can actually trap sediments and improve water quality. What's so unique about the riparian areas is that they only comprise about 2 or 3% of the total landscape in the Northern Plains states. Many state and federal wildlife agencies, they have these listed as sensitive and priority areas of conservation concern. It's estimated that 70 to 80% of all plains wildlife species utilize these riparian areas at some point in their lifetime. So they're extremely critical.
Beautiful fall day. These colors are really popping today. We're in what really is a national treasure. We're in one of the largest contiguous cottonwood galleries in the western states. There's not too many of these around anymore. They're kind of in a little bit of peril. Cottonwoods kind of have a bit of a precarious existence. If you look at the ecology of a cottonwood tree, everything has to line up just right for a cottonwood tree to propagate itself. When you see that cotton flying in June, that cotton's really a cottonwood seed, a little tiny seed that's only viable for about 7 to 14 days. So within that 7 to 14 days, that seed has to land on bare mineral soil that's moist, and it's got to stay moist long enough for that seed to send down a root and get into the water table. And those conditions don't happen every year. In fact, they only happen in this system maybe 1 in 10 to 20 years. And that's why you don't see all ages of cottonwoods. You just see just a few age classes of cottonwoods when you come into an area like this. With our rivers in the west, a lot of our rivers they're dammed, they have reservoirs, and so you don't get that June flooding. That's extremely important because when the cottonwoods fly in, the flooding has to happen at the same time. It may be flooding a lot earlier, in some cases even in the winter. But not only is the tree itself important, but it's all the vegetation that's associated with these cottonwood forests, all the grasses, the forbs, the shrubs that grow in the understory. Cottonwood trees, they don't form really dense canopies, and so they do allow sunlight to hit the forest floor, and that's why you have a lot of this really good vegetation in the understory of a cottonwood gallery. And that's really important for wildlife from both a food and cover standpoint. We actually have two species of cottonwoods here. We have the plains cottonwood, which has that broad leaf, and then we also have narrowleaf cottonwood. These that we're standing in right now are plains cottonwoods, and they rely pretty much 100% on seed reproduction. That's how they propagate themselves, is through the dispersal and the germination of those seeds. You know, we're standing on an area that is 4 different land ownerships. We have Wyoming Game and Fish Department, we have the Bureau of Land Management, we have the Bureau of Reclamation, and we have the National Park Service. And you know, if everybody just kind of did their own little thing and didn't work together, it just wouldn't work very well. These partnerships, they bring in all the interests, all the different groups that have a stake in what's going on in these areas. We really appreciate our partnership with the National Wild Turkey Federation. So it's really important to preserve these cottonwood trees. The cottonwood is almost a hallmark of these riparian areas in the lower elevation portions of the state. You can kind of think of it this way. As the cottonwoods go, so go these riparian systems. They really are kind of a hallmark species, kind of an indicator of whether your riparian system is really functioning well. If you don't have cottonwoods, it's probably a good indicator that something is really wrong with your system.
So as a district biologist with the National Wild Turkey Federation and administering the Northern Plains Riparian Restoration Initiative here in the Bighorn Basin, some of our major partners consist of the Bureau of Land Management, the Wyoming Game and Fish Department, private landowners, the National Park Service, and I help them to develop and design riparian projects, and also we bring additional funding to the table, supplemental funding to help expand the footprint and the amount of acres that can actually be treated on these riparian areas. These systems are pretty unique. They can expand hundreds of miles, and when you think about treating a riparian area, you have to start in the headwaters. We have invasive species up there that are drinking just as much water as the invasive down in the actual river bottom. Plants like Russian olive and salt cedar, they're spread by the actual water itself. Seeds can actually fall in the water and they flow downstream and they actually take root and regenerate. So we take a landscape level approach when we treat these systems.
Russian olive has an interesting story in Wyoming. It was brought here from Eurasia, and it was actually purposely brought here because it made a very hardy plant for shelter belts, and it was even promoted for a long time as a wildlife planting. And a single Russian olive tree does have some value for wildlife. It's got a berry that's highly edible. The problem is when it escapes cultivation, it escapes the places where you planted it for shelter belts and gets into these large river bottoms, these large riparian areas. And there it becomes a disaster because it is so competitive. It can outcompete all of the woody plants, all of the trees that we have in the riparian areas. In our country, what really hurts when you get Russian olive in is you lose nesting cover. Because Russian olive, even at low densities, when you don't have many of them, they're still providing purchase for nest predators. And so you can compromise the value of nesting cover for pheasants, for turkeys, for waterfowl. A bit of advice I would give to anybody, any landowner, any land manager, is it's much cheaper, much more efficient to catch it before it gets to this point where we're having to use large machines to get rid of all this biomass. If we're not willing to make the effort to manage and control Russian olive, we may lose these cottonwood riparian areas.
We're on the yellowtail habitat management area. One of the things we're doing out here is we're removing invasive species, and specifically Russian olive, from under our cottonwood galleries. These species have invaded and encroached into these areas. We're going to be using a masticator today to remove some of these trees. The masticator is a drum-mounted attachment on a skid steer, and it's got carbide teeth on it, and basically it shreds the trees. All right, well, with that, we're going to get to work here. The Bureau of Land Management is an agency within the Department of Interior responsible for administering public lands. We cover about 247 million acres. Most of those are found within the western United States. In Wyoming alone, we're responsible for about 18 million acres, which makes us the largest land management agency within the federal government. So in the Bighorn Basin, it's an arid region. It goes from 4,000 feet to 11,000 feet in elevation. And so when you start trying to put that together, you've got everything from the pronghorn in the lower elevations to moose and elk and bighorn sheep in the high country. We have to manage for all of those different species, along with allowing the local community to be able to utilize this for grazing practices such as cattle, sheep, horses. And so with all that comes challenges, but those are things that you have to embrace, and you have to figure out how to manage that. When you manage habitat at a landscape level, you've got to look holistically, and it doesn't just stop at fence lines and property borders. There's a lot of private land on these riparian areas, but then there's also a lot of public land, and so that's where we're trying to focus, is on the public areas to improve this habitat so that it can benefit those downstream. When you sit back and look at it, a lot of the original homesteads, was based around water, because if you didn't have water, you didn't have anything else. And so traditionally the conifer species would have been up on the rocks in the shallower soil types. Through fire suppression and the absence of fire, they've been able to encroach into these areas with deeper soil. And so that's part of what our objective is to remove that. And hazardous fuels management ties in with resource management and with the riparian initiative. By reducing the fuels and removing these juniper out of these riparian areas to make this one big drainage all treated and not just stop at the border.
The National Wild Turkey Federation developed the Northern Plains Riparian Restoration Initiative to assist land managers, agencies, landowners, and the proper management of riparian areas. The riparian areas are the lifeblood of the communities found within the Northern Plains states. They provide places to hunt, recreate, fish. The water courses are very important to the farming, the agriculture. Since its inception, the popularity of the NPRI has grown tremendously among land managers and has involved over 90 partners working to conserve about 50,000 acres. This has come at a cost of about $9.1 million. The NWTF's Northern Plains Riparian Restoration Initiative was developed in 2006 to promote the conservation of vital ecosystems in the states of Montana, Wyoming, North Dakota, and South Dakota.